Hello and welcome back to another episode of Dr. Owen's Muscle Medicine. In today's episode, we're covering what the latest high-quality scientific research would have us do and not do to build a gym routine that captures as much of the upside as possible with as little of the downside as possible as we go hunting hypertrophy or muscle growth specifically. Samuel, you feeling excited for this? Want to hazard a guess as to what the conclusions might be?
Yeah, dude. Honestly, I'm all in for working smarter, not harder. So yeah, please tell me you got some new ways for me to get more of my gym sessions other than just do more gym sessions.
Yeah, well, we're packing quite a bit up our sleeves today, but we can't take all the credit for it. We're drawing on a piece of research that was compiled by the American College of Sports Medicine, their most recent position stand on resistance training, prescriptions for muscle function, hypertrophy, and physical performance in healthy adults. It's awesome, and it's linked below. Yeah, when I sat down to research this episode, I was thinking, this is going to be a big piece of work. And it turns out that somebody else has already done it and published it in a peer-reviewed journal last month. So that's awesome. And it's so good. I highly encourage that as soon as you've finished with this video, ask your favorite LLM to read it out to you in the voice of your favorite actor or whatever synthesized voice of your choosing. And yeah, check out that link down below. Anyways, back to the meat in this sandwich. Samuel, drum roll, please. But please don't actually for the audio reasons. Progressive overload at training volumes of at least 10 sets per muscle group per week with a focus on eccentric overload is the take home for hypertrophy. And there's a bit of nuance in terms of how strength and power are a little bit different. This is what the study had to say. We synthesized data from 137 systematic reviews, including over 30,000 participants, and compared no exercise with resistance training, and found that it significantly improved muscle strength, size, power, endurance, contraction velocity, gait speed, balance, and multiple physical function outcomes. It also said strength was enhanced by lifting heavier loads, greater than or equal to 80% of your 1 rep max, through a complete range of motion and for 2 to 3 sets at the beginning of training sessions, and 2 sessions or more per week. Hypertrophy enhanced by higher volumes, more than 10 sets per muscle group per week, as we said, and eccentric overload. And power was enhanced by moderate loads, 30 to 70% of your 1 rep max, low to moderate volume, less than 24 reps per set. And that was it, really. There's some pretty interesting take-homes and nuance, though, to be found in that. Thoughts before we get into it?
What did you say? Did you say volume training? What was that?
Muscle hypertrophy enhanced by higher volumes. Power is low to moderate volume.
There's a phrase I was just thrown by in that.
And just to lick the assholes of the relevant authors of the paper a little bit further, one of the things that I thought was really cool is that it's quite rigorous in terms of setting a high bar for study inclusion in their review, considering only randomized control trials lasting at least 6 weeks in duration and focusing on healthy adults aged between 18 to 40. A lot of the medically published trials skew towards unhealthy adults and or elderly adults, and therefore it can be a bit hard for younger gym goers. They run a risk of failing to extrapolate how useful an intervention is to their own individual circumstances. So yeah, that makes it super applicable to our viewership and prevents outlandish conclusions being drawn from outlier or fringe behavior in studies of 11-year-olds doing their first ever dirty bulk. So yeah, pretty wicked piece of work.
I remember your first dirty bulk. Okay, so for all this, my take home is what progressive overload, training volumes of at least 10 sets per muscle group per week with a focus on eccentric overload, right? That feels quite like a lot of sets. I'd be interested to actually plan that out and figure out actually how many you get through per muscle group and how the muscle groups are split. However, if their findings for these, if these 30,000 participants results and their findings are half as impressive as their effort, we're in for a treat. And hopefully better results in the gym. But before that, what does hypertrophy mean? How does it work?
Yeah, so hyper means bigger. So like a hypermarket being bigger than a supermarket, or I don't know, in Elon Musk's case, a hyperloop, I guess, being bigger than a loop. And trophy means growth. So bigger growth. larger muscles. So that's, I guess, the aesthetic component of training, and it's making the individual muscle fibers larger. So we do get a lot of correlation, obviously, with developing strength and power. So power is force over time, and strength is maximal force production. Hypertrophy has a bit of overlap, but we do know that actually you can achieve pretty good hypertrophy gains without training at what are optimal for power and strength. And we'll get into what is optimal for hypertrophy now, if that's agreeable to you, Sam.
Yeah, just one very small thing. Muscle fibers are getting bigger or more, or you're getting more muscle fibers as you go through hypertrophy.
They're getting bigger.
Ah, cool. Okay. So you have a set amount or somewhat standard amount, and then they just get bigger as you go, as you
Mm.
hypertrophy.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's talk training volumes. So this is first up because it is consistently found to be the most important variable for training programming for hypertrophy. And the dose-response relationship, according to this study, shows what we've said. The minimum effective dose to grow your muscles is about 10 sets per muscle group per week. So that's quite a bit to be aiming for. And the optimal range is approximately 18 to 20 sets per muscle group per week, with diminishing returns beyond this threshold. And it should be progressive, with each exercise performed to at least 2 sets, but with benefits diminishing with each additional set thereafter. That's the big take home.
Okay, on volumes, there's a big difference from a practical perspective between 10 and 18 sets. What does the bell curve look like? Why is it even a bell? Actually, it is a bell curve because you've got the diminishing returns. How high up there are you getting 10 sets? Is that a long way up or not? Are you close to the optimal range, basically, when you do 10 sets per muscle group, or are you a long way away?
Yeah, great question.
18 feels like a lot. 10 feels manageable, particularly if you just smash it in 3 or 4 sessions a week.
So the authors have spelled out that 10 sets is the minimum effective dose. Going over that's great. 18 to 20 is optimal, but they haven't drawn out the curve. I guess they don't quite have enough data to fill in a perfect shaped curve that we can figure out what it would be like to do 14, what it's like to do 21. So we'll take them at their word and move on to training frequency.
Wicked.
Wicked indeed. So apparently frequency has minimal impact on hypertrophy when total volume is equated, which is to say, if you're getting through your 10 plus sets per muscle group per week, it doesn't matter how frequently you train them, including no difference between training a muscle group 1 day a week or 5 days a week when you're matching your volume in one of the studies looked at in this review. So yeah, training each major muscle group doesn't really make much difference if you're getting the volume in, but obviously that's quite hard to do in one session.
Yeah, that's incredible. So really gives you the flexibility to choose between, do you want to work out after work on a weekday and skip the weekends? Do you want to do it maybe the other way around? It might be pretty hard, to be fair, to get to hit 10 sets per major muscle group if you only work out 2 days a week. But that's nice to know there's the flexibility there from a practical perspective that actually makes life much easier to hit those ranges.
I think it probably explains why there's, such ongoing debate about what the best training split is of, push-pull legs or upper-lower or, separating out, niching out with just each muscle group getting its own day. Because as these authors of this research paper are saying, when you control for volume and the total volume's the same, it doesn't seem to make a difference.
Yeah, nice. Also, you should probably ask another question, which is very relevant. Definitions of muscle groups.
Yeah.
DIY? Or do they prescribe them? It's like a collection of studies, right? So it could even be separately defined, right? Or not?
Yeah. So they said here that, basically sometimes the authors are splitting body regions into upper and lower or push and pull. And sometimes they're targeting muscle groups based on horizontal or vertical movements. So, they're sort of suggesting that these terms are sort of used a bit loosely and differently by different research groups, I think. But I guess What we would perhaps do is maybe think of it as a collection of muscles located in a region of the body that coordinate together to perform certain movements. So, what are the muscles that group together to move your arms horizontally out in front of you, or to pull overhead vertically downwards, those sorts of things.
Quality. That makes sense.
We're maybe a little bit over sciencing this, like it's probably chest, back, shoulders, arms, legs, core, those sorts of things.
Yeah, there is a place and time for bro science, and we'll stick that one into this one. Push, pull. Let's go.
Let's go, indeed. Let's continue onwards. What are we talking about next, Sam?
Load and repetition range.
Load and repetition range. Contrary to traditional recommendations, load has minimal impact on hypertrophy, given that we hit a sufficient minimum percentage of our 1 rep max that we're training at. So wide effective range from about 30% of our 1 rep max to 100%, producing similar hypertrophy when the volume is equated. So if you're going lighter or going heavier, the key is just to multiply your weight by the number of reps, by the number of sets, and keep ticking off the total number and making sure it increments ever higher each week, essentially. And there is no evidence to support that traditional 8 to 12 rep range as sort of uniquely superior. In fact, higher teen rep ranges often perform just as well. And usually sort of that movement away from 1 rep max is pretty good for controlling form and therefore hopefully reducing injury risk. However, the practical consideration is that heavier loads of 80% or more of that 1 rep max enhance strength more than hypertrophy. So yeah, what's important to you? What are you doing it for? What's the trade-off?
Okay, this is wild, by the way. Let's just rewind to that 30% of 1 rep max produce similar results to 100% of 1 rep max for hypertrophy. I think it's such common wisdom that you should be pushing, maybe obviously don't just do 1 rep maxes, but you are often trying to increase your loads week over week. But I just feel like the practicalities of being able to drop that right the way down to as low as 30% of 1 rep max, plus do up to the high teens of reps, it suddenly really opens up a load of flexibility for home workouts as well. If you want to make sure you hit those volume targets over week, that's cool. So in that case then, lifting weights higher than 80% of 1 rep max increases strength. Is that right? As opposed to hypertrophy. And then having it less than that, then we're just going for hypertrophy. So it's 30 to 80 hypertrophy, 80 to 100 strength. Lord knows, before 0 to 30.
So basically you don't need to go heavy and right towards that 1 rep max for hypertrophy. And in terms of optimizing for strength, you do want to be going towards it. So your question there is, if you actually pull back on your load, but you match for volume, does that mean that you're leaving strength on the table? Yes. Does the other thing ring true? If you're doing really small reps of really high loads, are you leaving hypertrophy on the table? Yeah. So it does appear actually that increased load in 10 reviews of just over 5,000 people, once we're getting really, really close to that maximal 1 rep max territory, in 8 of the 10, it leveled hypertrophy whilst increasing strength and power. So that's pretty wild, actually.
Wow. Next, contraction type. Let's talk about eccentric movement.
Yeah, why are we skipping to eccentric movement? Doesn't it feel better when we're curling things up rather than slowly extending things down? Why are we talking about eccentric movement, Sam?
Because we always forget about it.
Yeah, we're true. Most of us don't really focus on it. The other reason why we're focused on it here today is that other than volume, once we're in that 30 to 100% sort of 1 rep max range, or even 30 to 80%, other than volume, it was only eccentric focused training or the implementation thereof that positively correlates repeatedly with increased hypertrophy. So super interesting. There's that controlled lengthening of the muscle or the lowering phase of a bicep curl. It yields a repeated hypertrophic or muscle growth advantage over not giving a crap really about that part of the lifting cycle. Absolutely wild. Quite profound, I guess, just given that, like, it's one of two things we can really be tinkering with in terms of our training protocols for hypertrophy. And like you say, probably one that's a bit overlooked and neglected by most of us who are thinking we're doing all the work on the upstroke and we just sort of recover or do whatever we want or pre-celebrate on the downstroke.
Yeah, mate, it's hiding in plain sight. It doesn't help that it's got the least accessible word ever as what describes it, eccentric, eccentric. But yeah, so a greater focus on the drop as well as the lift is beneficial. That makes sense. An eccentric overload. Is that effectively the same thing as a lift overload? Are there particular exercises that focus specifically on eccentric movements so you can focus on the overload? Because I feel like for me, eccentric overload sounds kind of hard to do because you've also got to get the thing up before it comes back down again.
Yeah, so interesting. So, for example, one of the common like rehabbing a Achilles tendon protocols, I think it's called that. What's it called? It's the Anderson protocol. Basically, you calf raise up with two feet, and then you come down with one. So to create an overload, to create more load on the way down than on the way up, you basically need to do something where you go up with two limbs, or with a training partner helping, or something like that, or some really crazy fancy machinery that I've not seen. And then you come down with one limb, an example of, doing your calf raises or perhaps a leg press or a leg curl or something. And so obviously on your way up, because you're focusing on the eccentric phase, you're not worried too much that the concentric's not enough for both legs, because you'd snap one leg off if you just take 50% of the musculature away and load-bearing apparatus. But yeah, muscles are stronger during lengthening and can handle more load on the way down than on the way up. And therefore, to get a good workout, we want to apply more load on the way down than the way up. Absolutely wild. But yeah, it's consistent with how you rehab a tendon. In the case of the Achilles, Alfredson protocol, that's what it's called. And it's also consistent with findings with regards DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. A focus on eccentric training tends to provide more DOMS. So I guess that also sort of plays into that sort of quite broadly supported viewpoint at the moment, that unfortunately the DOMS and the inflammation is probably an integral part of hypertrophy, growing our muscles. Maybe it's not a coincidence that the aspect of the lift that creates the most DOMS also creates the most potential for hypertrophy.
Nice. Also, would it be easy to do eccentric, or easier to do eccentric overload as you naturally do progressive overload in the first instance? So whatever you're like pushing up, you're putting down again. I mean, so there would be a degree of it naturally anyway, so long as you are actually focusing on it and not using gravity to do your work.
Kind of understand what you're saying. Like, we are progressing things as we go. But I guess what this paper's suggesting is that we should be thinking about including some training modalities that allow us to gently lower down more weight than we're capable of picking up.
I've got you. Yeah, specifically focused on that. Yeah.
Hard to implement, in fairness, probably why we don't think about it that much.
Yeah, well, we can have a look at that. Eh?
Yeah.
See if there are easy ones that it's just something that's escaped the mind. Cool. Okay. Let's talk about failure. Yeah, something I'm definitely guilty of is towards the end of a set, I'm like, right, okay, let's just bosh this out. Let's push my muscle group, all of my muscles to failure. Well, not all of them. Let's just talk about the one I'm training on the day. Makes me feel great when I walk out of the gym and I'm basically wobbling down the stairs. Is that silly or is that great?
Yeah, well, I think any one of us that's gone to failure quite early in a gym session knows that maybe there's a silliness to it. Like, I don't know if you ever done like a 1 rep max test early on in a gym session. Like, then you're just jelly and goop for the rest of it and not really getting any high quality work in. So for me, I was expecting that training to failure might not necessarily be a good idea. And that is what the researchers have found, that training to muscular failure is not necessary for hypertrophy. In fact, training to failure versus non-failure when volume is equated confers no advantage, with training to failure potentially increasing neuromuscular fatigue, muscle damage, and perceived discomfort without additional hypertrophy benefits. But what they did say basically is that you do need to be getting close to failure. And I guess this, kind of fits with that Muhammad Ali thing that he said of the only reps I count are the ones where it starts hurting, because that's where it really counts. So we shouldn't take this too literally and use pain as a signal, but instead the signal that we should be paying attention to is this perceived exertion, where basically you set a scale in your head of 1 to 10, 1 being really easy work and that you could do 1,000 reps of, and 10 is maxing out and getting stuck underneath the bar. We're aiming for sort of 8 or 9 every set, or you could frame it as reps in reserve. So you're wanting to leave maybe 1 to 2 reps in reserve on each set to ensure you are training close to failure, but not at failure.
I'm just thinking that as you obviously progress week over week, and you kind of obviously you track what you're lifting, and you should naturally be able to figure out where your point of failure is and where 80% of that is as you go, and that should obviously gradually increase over time. Kind of side question, but it's relevant to doing that calculation. With energy levels, how much does your kind of like failure point fluctuate? Does it fluctuate a lot or not?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think the thing we have to be dialing in on is like there are potential failures from multiple causes, and we need to be defining it as muscular failure. It's the muscle groups that are involved in that lift. Are you getting them to 1 or 2 reps from failure? So for example, like I think of lots of people go through like, I don't know, a interest in balance and wobble board phase, or what are they called, Bosu balls and that sort of stuff. Like doing your work on a Bosu ball, if the reason that you fail out or approach failure and have to stop doing that particular set is because you're about to lose your balance, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got your muscles near failure. And therefore you might not be doing sufficient intense work for that muscle group. It's just that you almost fell over. Or, that's, I think also probably aerobic capacity probably starts coming into things. If you're doing these like 30% of your 1 rep max long sets, are you failing because you haven't breathed in a minute because you forget to breathe when you lift weights? That's a good point. You need to be not failing because you need to come up for air.
Yeah, love the metaphor. What's next on the list?
We've got rest intervals. Yes, rest interval duration has minimal impact on hypertrophy outcomes. Interesting. Insufficient evidence to determine optimal rest intervals for hypertrophy. I guess a bit less interesting, but kind of to be expected. Longer rest intervals, 5 minutes compared with 2 minutes, allows greater training volume and neuromuscular function. I guess we've all felt that, but often just time constraints that just make it a bit impractical. The traditional recommendation is at 2 to 3 minutes per set. So that's what the authors have written. And they've suggested rest intervals should allow adequate recovery to maintain training volume and quality, where quality is the big one. If you're reaching an 8 out of 10 on your perceived exhaustion because you failed to catch your breath between the previous sets, then circle back to the point we were just making, or because you're supersetting with something else that's also maybe a bit cardiovascularly demanding, then you're reaching a stop point that's not actually your real muscular fatigue stop point. It's just some other stop signal. So your specific muscle groups aren't getting that intensity, quality, and volume that we're aiming for.
So it's almost like those rest intervals, we were oversimplifying it before, where it's like, okay, just do your 2 to 3 minutes. I also had the 5-minute ones as well, which is wild. But it actually sounds more like there's more nuance than that between certain sets. Like if you're doing a superset, for example, or if you were doing like a different muscle group, that perhaps even just from person to person, the rest periods there are not about how long it is. It's about actually getting your rest in, which I guess is kind of hard to think of practically until you get into your next set and you're like, oh shit, I'm only getting like midway through this particular set and I'm close to failing.
Yeah. And then the study lists off a load of other variables that essentially have an exceedingly minimal impact on hypertrophy and not particularly consistent or enough that we can say with any definitive boldness claim that these are going to help with hypertrophy. So blood flow restriction, I think not very well researched. And what you tend to get is you get an apples and orange comparison of they tend to be comparing dropping off the weight quite a lot when you slap on the tourniquet. So that kind of is an important confounder, really. Yeah, time under tension. That was a bit of a surprising one.
Wild.
Yeah, because of what we've just gone on about eccentric training and focusing on that. But I guess the point is the eccentric overload is the thing that most of us are missing. Yeah. Periodization. There just wasn't a lot of data. There's so many different ways to periodize your training protocols as well. There's not a lot of repeated multiple lab groups looking at the same periodization protocols and drawing conclusions. And the exercise order within your sessions, I guess, in terms of growing your muscles, that one does sort of makes sense. But again, I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit surprising that if you start your legs day with a certain exercise each time, you would think you're going to grow that muscle group, that part of the legs most, and then whatever you finish with the least. But maybe just not enough data on that one. Yeah, and that's interesting stuff. And go on.
What is periodization?
Periodization is just going through seasons of different training programming. So periodization is really popular with athletes that go in and out of season, essentially. So for those of us that just lift heavy things 12 months a year, we might not think about it, but if you were a bodybuilder, you would have an in and out of season period. If you're a rugby player, you'll have a pre-season period, you have intra-season training, and then you'll have post-season, what you're doing then, and then it'll be different.
Nice. Okay. And I guess that kind of athletes are in reality, well, maybe not bodybuilding, not aiming for hypertrophy. Maybe for bodybuilding they are though. So maybe there's something there from that.
And then, so what's quite interesting is in this 2026 American College of Sports Medicine position stand, they came to quite a different conclusion than their previous one, which I think was sort of 9 years old or something. And that was that essentially individualizing programs to increase participation is more important than conforming to specific criteria, which is to say that resistance training is just very good for you and effective. Yeah, even skewing towards the minimal doses of resistance training can produce substantial hypertrophic gains. So we should all try and adhere to some key principles, but we should follow whatever recipe we prefer and is going to get us to actually go ahead and do it. So prioritize progressive overload in weekly volumes of 10 sets or more per muscle group per week. Use a wide range of loads based on your preference and tolerance from 30 to 100% of your 1 rep max. Incorporate eccentric emphasis when possible. Train close to, but not actually to, failure. Allow adequate rest between sets to maintain volume and quality. Focus on consistency over rigid adherence to specific variables. And that's it.
Nice. Just to underline that point, that your original take home be that progressive overload at training volumes of at least 10 sets per muscle group per week with a focus on eccentric overload. It's actually, when you plot it out, very doable. It's not crazy. I think it might be easy to be put off by the 18 to 20 weekly sets per muscle group in the optimal range. But when I plotted it out, the 10 sets per muscle group on paper, actually it's feasible in 3 to 4 workouts a week. So yeah, I think this is really interesting stuff. I think it's actually quite practical for the most part, and nice to kind of shine a light on a bunch of different myths as well. See, this is someone who's been 33 now, so effectively been working out for not half my life yet, but not far from that either. So yeah, it's been very illuminating. I like it.
Yeah, good. So if you crack the code, then you should probably share that piece of paper with the good people who are still listening and watching. For everyone that has been, thank you so much for listening and watching our show. See you next week.
Bosh.